Welcome to this deep dive. And today we're exploring the story of Joe Michael Ervin. You might not have heard of him, but his case is a reminder that justice sometimes can take decades.
Yeah, absolutely. Irvin was active in the late 60s and early 80s, and although he died in prison, it wasn't until very recently that DNA evidence connected him to a string of unsolved murders.
So we're going to look at Ervin's early life, the crimes he committed, the twists and turns of the investigation, and ultimately how justice was served, even though posthumously. And we've got a lot of material to go through today: court records, newspaper articles, investigative reports. When we start looking at Ervin's early life and that first murder back in 1969, what stands out to you?
Well, it's interesting because this wasn't, a career criminal we're talking about, at least not at first. Irvin was only 17, a high school student when he committed his first murder.
Yeah, in Fort Worth, Texas.
In Fort Worth, Texas, yeah.
And he shot and killed a 21-year-old Rodney Jean Bonham, and the sources are saying that it seems like a totally random act of violence.
Outside a bowling alley.
Outside a bowling alley with no known connection between Ervin and Bonham, but then there's this detail that really is just chilling.
The phone call to the Bonham family.
Yeah.
After the murder, Irvin actually called them to express remorse.
It's just wild. That's not typical behavior, for someone who just committed this very calculated act of violence.
It really makes you wonder,
Yeah.
what was going through his mind. Was this some kind of warped attempt to, be a part of the story, or, just a genuine moment of guilt?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question that psychologists and criminologists probably could debate endlessly.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Sure.
but it's clear that from the material that this kind of sets a pattern for Irvin's future behavior, this blend of violence and almost like performative display of remorse.
Right.
And so he flees Texas, ends up in Colorado, changes his name to Joe Michael Ervin. You would think that'd be the end of it, but it's actually just the beginning of a very dark chapter.
Well, and what's striking is that Irvin was arrested numerous times over the next few years for burglary, assault, sexual assault, even child sexual abuse.
Wow.
But consistently, he was able to avoid any serious consequences.
And it's almost like he was a master manipulator, because he was able to convince the courts over and over again that he wasn't really responsible for his actions because of mental instability.
Yeah, he had diminished responsibility.
Yeah, and the sources also indicate that there were these bureaucratic errors with his name and his birth date on record.
Oh, yeah. And that played a big role because authorities couldn't connect him back to that outstanding Texas murder warrant.
Right.
So he essentially had a clean slate every time he encountered law enforcement.
So despite all these red flags, he just kept slipping through the cracks of the system.
And there was mention of district attorneys in the source material that we have that really tried to raise the bail in multiple occasions, but they weren't successful.
Wow, so things are about to get much, much worse, because the late 70s is where we see this really disturbing escalation in Irvin's crime, and we're talking about this series of murders in the Denver area that at the time seemed completely unconnected.
Right. Between 1978 and 1981, 4 women were murdered, and each case was so brutal and just seemingly random.
And you have Madeline Fury-Lavaudes, a housewife stabbed to death in her own home.
Dolores Barajas.
Dolores Barajas.
A hotel employee stabbed on her way home from work. Gwendolyn Harris also stabbed, found in her neighborhood.
And then Antoinette Parks, who was only 17 years old and 6 months pregnant when she was murdered.
Yeah, it's awful.
The sources really paint this picture of fear that gripped Denver at the time.
Yeah, you can imagine.
Because no one suspected Joe Michael Ervin. He was still operating under the radar. He was blending in and all the while allegedly committing these horrific acts. But then in 1981 comes this almost unbelievable twist.
The DUI stop and the shooting of Officer Deborah Sue Kaur
Yeah.
was such a tragic event that ultimately leads to his capture.
He also shot a young man, Glenn Spies, who tried to intervene.
Yes.
Thankfully, he survived, but Ervin didn't get very far. And they apprehended him when he was trying to saw off his handcuffs.
Oh, wow.
And so reading through the source material, you can almost feel the sense of relief. It's like this dark cloud had lifted for Denver.
Oh, for sure.
But at the same time, there's this frustration because Ervin takes his own life in his cell while he's awaiting trial for Officer Kaur's murder.
Right.
And so he never had to stand trial. He was never brought to justice for the deaths of those 4 women.
Yeah, and for decades, those cases remained cold. But something remarkable was happening behind the scenes. DNA technology was advancing very rapidly and would eventually rewrite this entire story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fascinating how, science can sometimes provide these answers long after we think all hope is lost.
Right.
Between 2013 and 2018, DNA evidence linked those 4 Denver murders. Madeline Fury-Lavaudes, Dolores Barrages, Gwendolyn Harris, and Antoinette Parks.
That must have been a huge breakthrough for investigators, but I imagine incredibly frustrating. At the same time, they have the pieces of the puzzle, but still no name to put with the DNA.
Exactly. And imagine, the families of those victims knowing that this technology is out there that could potentially, identify the killer, but they still didn't have those answers. And it wasn't until 2021, with the rise of ancestral DNA research, that things really broke wide open.
And this is where it gets really mind-blowing. So they're able to use this technology to trace the killer's DNA back to Texas, and ultimately they find a match with Joe Michael Ervin.
It's incredible, right? It's like something out of a science fiction novel. They actually had to exhume Irvin's body to confirm the match.
Wow.
But the results were undeniable.
Talk about justice from beyond the grave. This man had died decades earlier, thinking that he had escaped accountability for these heinous crimes.
And it's a testament to the persistence of those who worked on this case. You're never giving up hope, and it speaks volumes about the power of scientific advancements to uncover the truth no matter how much time has passed.
I was reading about how this ancestral DNA technology is being used in more and more cold cases, and it's leading to all sorts of breakthroughs.
It's revolutionizing the field of forensic science. Think about it. It allows investigators to tap into this vast network of genetic information, connecting distant relatives, building family trees that can lead back to suspects.
But it also raises some pretty complex questions, doesn't it? Especially around privacy and consent.
Absolutely, it's a double-edged sword.
No.
On the one hand, you have this incredible tool that can solve crimes, bring closure to families, even prevent future crimes. But then on the other hand, you have these ethical implications, accessing and using people's genetic information, often without their direct knowledge or consent.
It seems like we're really just scratching the surface of this technology and its potential impact on society as we consider the broader implications of this case. What stands out to you?
For me, it really underscores the importance of ongoing dialogue and careful consideration. We need to be having these open and honest conversations about the ethical boundaries of using DNA technology this way. How do we balance the pursuit of justice with the right to privacy? What safeguards need to be in place to ensure that this technology is used responsibly?
It's a lot to grapple with, but these are crucial conversations to have as this technology continues to evolve. And I think the Joe Michael Ervin case is a really powerful example of both the potential and the pitfalls of this new frontier in forensic science. It really makes you think, right? What if this was your family, impacted by a crime and this technology could bring answers? Would you feel differently about the privacy concerns?
It's such a deeply personal question, and there's really no easy answer, but I think it highlights the complexity of the issue. What might seem like a clear-cut invasion of privacy in one context could be a beacon of hope in another.
And as this technology becomes more commonplace, those lines are only going to get blurrier. We're seeing it already with companies offering, these DNA testing kits directly to consumers.
Exactly, and those databases are growing exponentially, which means the potential for law enforcement to utilize those in criminal investigations is also expanding.
So that's exciting and a little bit unnerving, right? On the one hand, you have the possibility of solving more cold cases, bringing closure to families, maybe even preventing future crimes. But on the other hand, there are these big questions about genetic surveillance and the potential for misuse.
It's like we're standing at a crossroads, and it's crucial that we as a society, engage in these conversations, that we weigh the benefits against the risks, and we create some sort of framework for using this technology ethically and responsibly.
So where do we go from here? What are the next steps in navigating this uncharted territory?
I think education is key. The more people understand about this technology, how it works, and its potential implications, the better equipped we'll be to make informed decisions about its use. We also need to make sure that there are strong legal protections in place to safeguard individual rights and prevent abuse.
And that makes a lot of sense. And I think it also highlights the need for, continued dialogue between scientists, policymakers, law enforcement, and the public.
Absolutely. We need to be having these conversations at every level, from classrooms to courtrooms to Congress. The future of DNA technology and its role in society is something that we're all shaping. And it's crucial that we do so thoughtfully and with, an awareness of both its promise and its potential perils.
This deep dive into the Joe Michael Ervin case has really taken us on a journey, hasn't it? We've gone from the gritty details of his crimes to the cutting edge of forensic science, and now into this really thought-provoking discussion about the ethics of DNA technology.
And while Ervin's story is a chilling reminder of the dark side of human nature, it's also a testament to the power of science and that enduring pursuit of justice. The fact that his crimes were ultimately brought to light even after his death, thanks to these advancements in DNA technology, I think that offers a glimmer of hope.
It really does, and it leaves us with a lot to consider, both individually and as a society. And I think as we grapple with this ever-evolving landscape of DNA technology, it's important to remember that its power ultimately lies in our hands, and we have this responsibility to use it wisely,
hmm
ethically, and with a deep respect for, the implications it holds.
Couldn't agree more. What are your thoughts on this? What resonated with you most about this case and these bigger questions that it raises? We'd love to hear your perspective.